So I read 1984 by George Orwell. I wanted to do this a lot earlier, but I had to get my thoughts together because it's complete fiction, number one. It's very close to unbelievable and unrealistic as far as it takes the ideas we're about to talk about. But in the book, there are so many correlations to what's going on right now. You guys know that we do the Karen channel. We talk about Karens being belligerent, not they're being entitled for whatever reason. But I think that if you watch my channel, you know that I try to go a little bit deeper every now and then. Yeah, it's funny, but we try to go a little bit deeper, try to understand it. And there's some concepts in this book, 1984 by George Orwell, that I think actually help us to understand what's going on in the mind of not just the funny haha Karen, but an entire political movement that happens to be going on right now in America that's scary. It's scary because they're actually passing laws, trying to pass laws to get rid of certain parts of history. It's scary because the aggressiveness of the Karens and the Darrens are getting more and more violent in nature. It's scary because no matter how many tapes and proof and videos you take, there seems to be more and more people denying the reality of what's going on. So I wanted to talk about a couple examples in this book. If you guys have read the book 1984, let me know. Let's get into it. So, the book is it follows our friend Winston, okay? Winston is a hero, anti-hero. This book is dark, and so to say hero just doesn't really put it into the proper terms. Like, it doesn't end well. But he's doing his best, okay? Winston is in a dystopian society, meaning that everything around him, in the book, right? Everything around him is controlled by Big Brother. This is where we get that term Big Brother from. He's being watched constantly. There's thought police. You can't think the wrong things. You can't look the wrong way. You've got to follow the crowd and do everything they do. You can't even show, well, in his caste, because there's castes in this society, and there's problems with that too, but we're only going to speak about a few things. But in his caste, you can't even really enjoy things like sex, like primal nature. It's all about being controlled by the state. The state is called the party. There's the inner party of the people who control everything. There's the outer party of the people who support the people who control everything. And then there's the proles, the proletariat, the masses, the unwashed masses who nobody cares about. And quite frankly, is the most unrealistic part of this book because they seem to be without any curiosity or inclinations of self. And it kind of shows how George Orwell thought about the masses himself. Let's be honest about that. But let's talk about these two things. In the book, we're going to talk about, or in this idea of how it relates to Karenism, how it relates to this political uprising on the right that has kind of turned a little bit fascist, honestly. Where they're coming from with the angst, with the continuous rejection of simple stuff like masks as tyranny, wanting to get rid of history altogether in order to feel better. All of it has some resonance in this book. So we follow Winston. He starts out writing a diary. In his diary, this is bad because you're thinking for yourself. So it starts off with him being bad by being normal. That should tell you where we're going. He's a member of where he works is called the Ministry of Truth. The Ministry of Truth is all about lies, about rewriting things and sending it to the masses and lying about what's happening. He begins to find himself. He begins to realize he's not just a brainwashed idiot, that he has thoughts of his own, and that gets him into trouble. And in the end is the big climax where him and the inner circle, the inner party people who've been watching him, the big brother, go head to head about what's right, what's wrong, what to believe and what not to believe. And that's where I'm going to start, because I want to talk about an idea called doublethink. Doublethink, okay? If you're going to ask, how can somebody possibly find this oppressive? How can these people act so crazy in the mall and call the police for no reason? How can people be so entitled? It really is embodied in the idea of doublethink. More importantly, the control that causes a doublethink and how they control to get someone to think this way. These are the only things we're talking about in this book. There's a lot more to go over, but that's what we're talking about today. I hope everybody's already got on. If you're not here, I guess you'll see it on my Patreon. I'm gonna start here. Remember, we're talking about doublethink and how we got there, how it relates to us. O'Brien stopped him with a movement of the hand. O'Brien is the adversary. Another example, he said, and he's talking to Winston. Some years ago, you, Winston, had a very serious delusion indeed. You believed that the three one-time party members named Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, men who were executed for treachery and sabotage after making the fullest possible confession, were not guilty of the crimes they were charged with. You believed that you had seen unmistakable documentary evidence proving their confessions were false. There was a certain photograph about which you had a hallucination. O'Brien's talking to our fan Winston, our friend. Said he had a hallucination. You believed that you had actually held it in your hands. It was a photograph something like this. He pulls out the oblong slip of newspaper that appeared between O'Brien's fingers. Perhaps 5 seconds it was within the angle of Winston's vision. It was the photograph, and there was no question of its identity. It was the photograph. It was another copy of the photograph of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford at the party function in New York. Winston saw this. These people supposedly were already executed for their crimes. They confessed, and Winston, after their death, after the confession, saw this photograph in the place where he works, the Ministry of Truth, where it's all lies. He saw the photograph, realized that there was a conspiracy, and threw it away immediately. But he knew that he saw it. He knew it existed. For only an instant, it was before his eyes. Then it was out of sight again. But he had seen it, unquestionably. He'd seen it. Let me turn off the music for just a second. Unquestionably, Winston had seen this photograph showing something wrong. He made desperate, agonizing effort to wrench the top half of his body free. He's chained down by O'Brien. For the moment, he had even forgotten the dial. The dial is something that O'Brien uses basically to torture him. All he wanted was to hold the photograph in his fingers again, or at least to see it. He wanted some semblance of the truth that he knew existed, that this society or everyone in the party, is telling him that is not true. "It exists!" he cried. "No," said O'Brien. He stepped across the room. There was a memory hole, a hole in the wall where they throw things that are true. O'Brien lifted the grating, unseen. The frail slip of paper was whirling away on the current of warm air behind that wall. It was vanishing in a flash of flame, because they burn things that they don't consider true. O'Brien turned away from the wall. "Ashes," he said. "Not even identifiable ashes. Dust. It does not exist. It never existed." "But it did exist. It did exist. It exists in memory. I remember it. You remember it," says Winston. "I do not remember it," said O'Brien. Winston's heart sank. That was doublethink. We're going to use this word again. Doublethink. O'Brien was using, in Winston's mind, doublethink. He had a feeling of deadly helplessness, Winston did. If he could have been certain that O'Brien was lying when he said he didn't remember it, it would not have seemed to matter. But it was perfectly possible that O'Brien had really forgotten the photograph in a split second. And if so, then already he would have forgotten his denial of remembering it and forgotten the act of forgetting it. How could one be sure that it was simple trickery? Perhaps the lunatic dislocation in the mind could really happen. That was the thought that defeated him, Winston. O'Brien was looking down at him speculatively. More than ever, he had the air of a teacher taking pains with a wayward but promising child. "There is a party slogan dealing with the control of the past," he said. "Repeat it, if you please," he tells Winston. "Who controls the past controls the future," says Winston. "Who controls the present controls the past," repeated Winston obediently. Remember that. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Before we get into the antics and the craziness of the Karens or the people that you know who've seemed to gone off the deep end watching Q videos or rioting against the Capitol, or finding any reason to feel oppressed at all times, before we go into that, understand the end game of this fanaticism. Who controls the present controls the past. I.e., okay, we'll just go with New Hampshire because I saw it. The state budget Republican Chris Sununu signed in June 2021, including a clause discrediting the concept of unconscious bias. The clause in the right to freedom from discrimination in public workplaces and education amendment states that one's identity does not make an individual inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. This is the big one. A teacher loyalty bill introduced in the 2020 legislative session goes a step further and threatens to discipline any teacher promoting a negative account or representation of the founding and history of the United States. People, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because we have to ask, how did it get to this place? He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. I.e., right now in New Hampshire, they're trying to pass a bill that says if you're going to talk about the founding of the United States, well, you can't say anything negative about it. Just forget slavery. Forget that for now. Because that's what they're trying to get rid of. Just erase it from history. What about the idea of colonization itself? What's negative? Is the Boston Tea Party negative or positive? Destroying property? Or fighting for freedom to be represented? What's negative? What's positive? Are we talking about manifest destiny, going and conquering everything you can see because God told you to? Is that negative? Is that positive? To say you can't teach something negative about the facts, the founding of this place, we're beginning to see the idea, right? The idea of controlling the past to better have a control of the future. Authoritarianism. To better be able to create more doublethink. The idea of doublethink is what happened with O'Brien here. He saw the picture, but he can make himself forget it by destroying it. And the craziest part that our friend Winston is saying is, I wonder if he actually forgot it in that second. At the end of this, I'm going to show you how, yes, that's possible. It is possible to have such a mind, to believe in something so much that you're willing to disregard facts, you're willing to disregard things you once knew even, in order to accommodate where you are now, or what is required of you at this moment. This is where we are. Let's go on. Our friend Winston. So that was at the end of the book. This is serious. This is what's happening. The minute that you can say to yourself, this didn't exist, when you knew that it existed, we're looking at a very, very, very strange fruit of democracy here. Okay? Because without an educated electorate, democracy doesn't exist. It just becomes a place where the people in power keep power. The best way to keep democracy out of the hands of those without power is to change the history. In this book, 1984, Winston works for a place that constantly changes history, piece by piece, every day. Every day, the party says something, and his job is to go back through all of the documents, and if it was against what they said today, change it. Get rid of all of it. Destroy it. Make the amendment act like it was always that. Whatever they said today, it was always that. And the only way to even be able to think of something like this, or say that this is okay, or agree to something like this as a populace, is the idea of doublethink. You have to be able to do that in your mind. The people who don't, they get Winstonized, tortured or whatever, and try to brainwash. The rest of the people, on the other hand, see that there's no way out and find it very easy to just change their mind, to act like what they knew they no longer know, to act like they never saw doctors in hospitals for all of their entire life, delivering babies and doing 8 to 16-hour operations with this on. And because it was necessary for whatever they were going for their party, for their power, to maintain their power, they were willing to tell you now that this will cause cancer. That this somehow will negatively affect your health if you wear it for too long. You ask yourself, how did they get there? It's easy. It's easy. You see, when you can actually, put forth this doublethink in an effective way, you can get someone to believe anything or disbelieve anything they used to believe if it means staying with the party, if it means staying in power, if it means staying alive, if it means getting rid of the idea even of cognitive dissonance. They'll never have it. They'll always have another excuse. Do you remember when the idea of wearing this was... This goes straight to the Karen now. I mean, we went to where it could go. The idea that you can just destroy history, and now it's being legislated. This authoritarianism is in constant legislation to make sure that it's continued. But do you remember when somebody said, well, if you breathe in your own, CO2, it's bad for you? Or then it went from that to, well, you're covering your face and God says that you shouldn't. Oh, no, you're a Muslim. And then it went, when you see these things constantly change, it wasn't that they believed it, the first one, or they believed the second one, or they believed the Muslim one, or they believe that, what's the last one I heard? They're grooming you for communism. They don't believe any one of those. They literally believe whatever is necessary at the moment. And they can put away anything else. Because when you engage in this doublethink, you're never wrong. And you never have to be wronged. You don't even remember you just had the paper and put it in the wall. You literally don't. You've convinced yourself not to. You don't think it's possible, but I'm going to show you how at the end. Let's read another passage. Now that we got to doublethink, you say, well, how do you really keep an entire population in doublethink? How can you possibly keep someone like this for that long? 1984 talks about that as well.